Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this week's episode of the Pets Alumni Network podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and today we are joined by Flora Schuer. Um, how are you doing, first of all?
I'm doing well. It's awesome. It's nice outside
Mm,
in March, so it's been a gloomy week.
mm.
Yeah, when the weather's nice, I'm happy.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome to hear, right? I think it's, something that's correlated with, a lot of our, mental, physical health. So,
Mhm.
it's something to keep an eye on. So to give a bit of background on you, you graduated from Pet in 2019. I saw that you were in the Wind Symphony. You participated in DECA.
I did.
Yeah, so how are those experiences, and do you have any other key experiences for you that stand out?
Okay, both of those experiences were peak. I love them
Yeah.
both. I actually joined the Wind Symphony at Pet in grade 12. So I wasn't in music for the first 3 years. I did visual arts, I think, but then last minute I switched to music. In grade 12, because I had actually played the flute for 7 and 8 years, and my best friend at the time convinced me to join, and I auditioned in front of Mr. Colley. I don't know who the
Mm.
teacher is now for it. Yeah, so amazing experience. DECA was also awesome. I loved it. It was great. I wish I had gotten more involved in all of my previous years. These were all in grade 12. Yeah.
Hmm. So sounds like, business was kind of at the forefront of your mind, being in DECA. Was that kind of your first exposure to business, or were there like other experiences that kind of guide you in that direction?
So business was actually not at the forefront of my mind for most of high school. I wanted to do science all the way up until grade 11, like semester two. I fast tracked chemistry. So that was what I wanted to go to university for. But then I was just a horrible student. Like I was not focused in school. It's like I thought I wanted it because it's what I had told myself that I was interested in since I was like 12 years old. But then when it actually came to the courses, I was just like, I don't think it was actually calling to me. And it was like at some point I had to stop lying to myself, I guess. Um, yeah. So I couldn't go into chemistry by the end of grade 11 because I got like a 60 something in grade 12 chemistry, which I had fast tracked. So it was just like that door just closed on me. Like it was impossible. So I had to like really confront my future pathways of like what I wanted to do with my life. At one point I was like, I don't even know if I want to go to university, because this is when I started getting exposed to like the YouTube side. Like I was watching like maybe like entrepreneur YouTubers. I don't really remember, but I just remember understanding that you didn't have to go to university, which is very much the default path and what my parents had always just like assumed would be what would happen after I graduated. And I think that's very much the culture as well. But then I just started realizing like maybe not. And then my parents gave me a lot of like backlash about it. I had a really good teacher. I don't know if he's still around, but Mr. Shields. Shout out to Mr. Shields. It was his capital markets class. I became really really interested in business from one class and like one teacher who just kind of like yeah changed my path.
Hmm. Yeah, that whole, science, kind of contemplation kind of resonates with me, right? Like I think we're talking offline, Pet is a very, STEM focused kind of school. So, it's good to talk about, those kind of cultural expectations maybe that we have in our families and in our minds maybe. So you ended up going to Schulich at York, right? Which is, one of the top business schools in Canada. What was kind of your decision-making process behind that? Did you have any other, schools in mind?
I did. So I applied to 5 business schools. So in grade 12, I decided, yes, it's business or bust. I'm all the way in business. Applied to 5 business schools. Surprisingly, I got into all of them. I didn't aim like super high. I think Schulich was the most prestigious school that I had applied for. But for a long time, I was debating between Laurier and Schulich. Laurier because they have a really good co-op program, and a bunch of my friends had decided to go to Laurier, and it was like living at home versus living abroad. Sorry, not abroad. Living, what is that? Where is in Waterloo, or
Mhm.
living in Waterloo, having like a more traditional university experience. So I was like really agonizingly debating between the two for a long time. I ended up going with Schulich, and I'm so happy I did. I mean, in hindsight, I ended up like Schulich. There's not a co-op program, but you can still work and you can like do like co-op, a kind of co-op, like there's like ways around it. So I ended up getting that experience. I also ended up going on exchange and living abroad at Schulich, which I was like the time of my life, like peak experience. So I can speak more about that, but I'm really happy with my choice at the end.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had kind of this all like, kind of figured out, like you had kind of a roadmap and you had kind of like pros and cons of, different schools. So, it definitely sounds like you had a well-intentioned, kind of pathway rather than kind of just closing your eyes and like blindly picking, which is, definitely easy to fall into that trap, right? So yeah, like where did you go on exchange, and how was that experience for you?
Okay, so Schulich, I went on exchange in my fourth year. I lived in France for 6 months. It was in Nice in France. So it's tropical, super great vibes. I left like in January from the a cold, harsh Canadian winter. Um, I traveled like all around Europe. Before I left, I kind of had this intention. I guess you're right. I am like pretty intentional, which doesn't feel that way sometimes. I feel like I'm just like blindly like going about in life, seeing where things will take me. But I guess there is a direction sometimes. In Europe, I traveled around. I had this like idea that I wanted to backpack because I was reading about like how Steve Jobs like traveled around India for a year and then he came back and started Apple. And I was like, okay, I kind of want that. And at that time, I was kind of like getting into studying like Buddhism and different religious like philosophy kind of stuffs. And I was like, okay, you have to like, I guess I was kind of on like a bit of a spiritual quest of interest. So I wanted to like let go of my material possessions and desires. So I had this like little idea of backpacking around Europe, which I did. Stayed in a bunch of hostels, ate a lot of canned food. It was a great experience. um, yeah, I love exchange. If anyone gets an opportunity to live abroad, I would one like highly recommend it because it just like opens up I think it opened up my worldview a lot because before, like I was born and raised in Canada, I traveled a bit. My family is in China, but aside, like I hadn't really seen the world or traveled before in that kind of way alone. And I'd say like if you do, number two is to be very intentional about it and like have a very open mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you kind of consider other countries at first, or was it always France? Like how did that selection process go?
For me, it was always France because I was in French immersion.
Yeah.
Schulich is really good about it. They have a really good process. They have a lot of partner schools. I don't remember the number. It's maybe like 80, 100, 150, something like that, all around the world. And all the students who go on exchange, they write exchange reports. So very detailed, like 10 pagers about everything, like nitty gritty from like creating a bank account, how to make friends, culture shock, dining. So I did a lot of reading of different places and I picked Nice at the end. And then
hmm
there's an application process. Nice is competitive because like everyone wants to go to a tropical sunny place. Yeah, I was lucky. Like I got that one.
So I'm glad you touched on, the learning points of living abroad, right? Those like little things like, setting up a bank account, right? That might be hard. Transferring the money from Canada to wherever you are, right? Um, like how did you kind of like go about doing those things when you feel kind of lost, right? Like you're kind of stuck on your own. Like what's the first step for someone who's trying to like do something so difficult and move across the world?
I think for me, it showed me like it's actually not that hard. If you have to do
Right.
something, you
Yeah.
end up doing it, and then it's just like you show yourself that you can do it. So I'm like, you know what? Like at the end of that experience, I was like, you know what? I actually can like live alone and set up my own bank account because I have no other choice. I'm forced
Right.
to. The school made it pretty easy where the part I went to EdHec in Nice. Uh, they had the banks like come to the school and they had like a little booth thing because there was maybe like 80 like exchange students from all around the world, mostly from around Europe, but there was like a
Mhm.
large class, a large cohort. So like the school had helped out a lot and that was really great. I also was lucky to speak some French, so I could get
Right.
my way around like on the streets. I remember the first day I got there,
Mm.
I didn't have a SIM card. So I
Oh,
had no data, I had no Wi-Fi. So I literally like ran around the streets, like going up to like coffee shops and stuff and be like, excuse-moi, like,
yeah.
do you know where's the closest place I can
Right.
get a SIM card? And then that took me like 4 hours because people just kept giving me bad directions. So that was the
Yeah.
first day I didn't have an internet connection.
Yeah.
After I got my SIM card and I was able to set up my data, that was when I kind of figured things out myself. Because
Mhm.
you can search up anything online and figure things
Right.
out. The first day was
Right.
just
Yeah.
running around when the sun was setting. I didn't have data.
So, you touched on that kind of maturity and like figuring things out, right? Do you think you would have been as ready if you had gone on this exchange in maybe like your second or third year? Like, are you glad that you did it in your fourth year?
Hmm. I don't know. It's hard to say. I really don't know. I guess
Yeah.
like I had different formative experiences in my second and third year. It was also during COVID. I was definitely like probably less mature in second and third year. I don't know if it would have really been different, or if I was like forced in that position in second and third year, if I would have just grown. So it's hard to say if it's the timing that made that experience, or like just that experience itself forced me into, adapting to the circumstance.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. I guess, you never know, right? Like if it's the experience that makes you grow, if it's, you have it within, like you said, when you push your boundaries, you learn a lot about yourself, right? When your back's against the corner, you learn a lot about yourself, right? So one of the experiences, that you have is I saw that you were a management consultant, right? And that's kind of like a huge kind of broad term, I guess, like, and it's kind of misunderstood, right? Even at business school, a lot of people might be like, what is consulting? Why are you asking people who don't know about your company to help you solve these problems, right? So yeah, like in a nutshell, like what is consulting and like how did you get into it?
The way I explain, so I did an internship in management consulting for 4 months, which I loved. It was probably like, um, I don't know if my favorite internship. I really, really enjoyed that internship. The way I explain management consulting to people is just like you're like a parrot who like squawks information back at like management. Like sometimes internally, it's like when you're so in the weeds, or it's like let's say you're in like a particular like social unit, like you're in a family, and from the outside, someone peering in can see exactly what's going on and the dynamics. But when you're on the inside, like in the eye of the storm, you don't really know. You're just so like caught up in it. So you need someone else's perspective. That is like, I think that was essentially the role that I did at that firm. And that's my understanding of management consulting now. It's like you have to be a very good listener. You have to be sharp. You have to like understand what's going on, be able to actually pinpoint what's going on. Like when management is talking to you, like, hey, these are like the struggle areas that my team is dealing with. Here is the opportunities. I think you talk to like a bunch of different people in the organization, and you have to put together almost like a puzzle of what's going on and where the quote unquote pain points are. That's the word that we would use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of applies to like everything really, right? Like being a good listener, having a holistic view, getting multiple viewpoints, being able to pinpoint a solution. Those are all super important, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, thanks for the color on, consulting, but I think kind of an undertone that we've kind of been alluding to is the whole entrepreneurship thing, right? You mentioned, you learned about Steve Jobs, that kind of thing. Like when did entrepreneurship kind of come into the picture from you after like you transitioned from consulting?
So I was always kind of like ambitious in that way without realizing that it was entrepreneurship. Like I I mean, I forgot when this was. I think in like first or second year uni, or maybe in high school, I wanted to start like an Amazon FBA lash selling business. So I ordered like $200 of inventory of eyelashes. I created my whole shop. It was during winter break. I was bored. But I think I was always interested in that. And even when I go back and read like my old diaries, it's so obvious to me because I'm like, stop, no more reading. $5 if you want to read more. Like it's I think I've always been into it. I started this tutoring business online, but I didn't really see I didn't really consider that entrepreneurship. I was just like, let me make an extra $500 a month. Like this is great.
Yeah.
um yeah, I guess I don't know if I mentioned this. I did not, but when like during my last few years of university, so actually when I was on exchange, there was this company, the startup that I like kind of matched with online, and I started working for them, just like making YouTube videos. It was like a soft skills education company, like a startup. I ended up coming back and working for that founder for about a year and a half and building out that company. So that was kind of like my real taste of entrepreneurship and like a founder way, like talking about equity, talking about like actual like an organization. And that was when I kind of like I think I really fell in love with it.
Yeah, so kind of what you alluded to a little bit, maybe, or kind of what I'm wondering too is, so you mentioned you worked at a big management consulting company, right? That's been around for a while. They're very big, very large in scale, right? And then you have this experience working for a startup, right? Which is probably a lot different, right? Can you kind of like compare and contrast, like what's the difference between, your working experience in each company?
Okay, so yes, I've worked at some big companies. Also did an internship at a big four, at KPMG. I think the difference is, what would I say? There was a lot more hand holding in the big companies,
Hmm.
more processes that you kind of follow versus in a startup, you kind of build things from like, yeah, you just build it from zero. So I think for me, I feel like I enjoyed I like the fact that I had those experiences at bigger companies and I kind of saw how they operated. And that kind of inspired me when it came to building out processes at the startup. I think there was also a thing though where I had worked at a big company, so I kind of had an idea of how it would be. And then I tried to bring that to a startup before the startup was ready for it. Like you can't build out HR processes for like a team that doesn't exist. It's not applicable. So I think I got like two experiences on both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, I just yeah, and then you kind of see like, and I recommend it like when students ask me sometimes like, oh, do you recommend working at a startup, like a smaller company or a big four company? I'm like, why not just try both and see what suits you?
Right. Yeah, I think that's, great advice, like figuring things out, right? And it kind of reminds me of your point about, figuring out, like, for example, like the bank account, right? Like you just have to like figure things out, especially when there's no like clear path. And that's, yeah, definitely a true sense of like grit. And you mentioned like the timing element, right? Like, for example, like if you want to help someone, but they're not ready to really hear it, right? Like there's definitely a timing element to what you implement, right? So fast forwarding on, you're at Schulich Startups, right? Which is, like an organization run by Schulich, which helps entrepreneurs like secure funding, like that kind of thing, right? Hone their entrepreneurial mindset, right? How did you get into that?
Mm. Okay. Backtrack. I forgot to mention. I think the
Yeah.
time I actually started falling in love with
Yeah.
startups and entrepreneurship was in my third year at Schulich. I applied to be the marketing coordinator at Schulich Startups, and I got the role. So I did marketing for them for one semester. I went to a lot of events, and that's when I started to meet the entrepreneurial ecosystem and the community in Toronto. And I was like, these people are so cool. They have amazing ideas, and they're kind of shaping the future in some way. It's like the forefront of tech or like whatever industry that they are. It's so diverse. Like I would meet people building like I remember there's one that was building like an automated kind of robotic arm system to help to help with accessibility at gas stations. So like to help them fuel their car, and I was like, that's really cool. um I don't, there's so many cool ideas, like in so many different industries. And I think like for me, I have an interest in like all kinds of industries. So it like captured my attention. Yes. So
Right.
I left to go work at that startup for a year and a half. And then that startup kind of it got to a place where I felt really lucky for that experience, but the startup had kind of pivoted to be a role that wasn't really like in line with how I saw my career growing like the fastest going forward. So different customers than what we originally targeted. But that startup that I was working at, it started making money. So it was great, but it was like time for me to see what was next in my career. And I had gone back to a Schulich Startups event because I maintained my relationship with my people that I worked with there. They were great. They were hiring at the role, so they were expanding their stuff while I was gone. They got a new office. Yeah, so it was just like I met them at an event, which I guess like if there are students watching this, if you're in high school right now and you're thinking about going to university, I would say like talking to people is the best thing. And Nathan, you were telling me how like you didn't really know what you wanted, so you were just talking to people. Like conversations change everything because that's how you're going to learn directly from people's experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
talk to people that you know. Yeah, and then that's how I landed Schulich Startups, like this full-time role now as a community manager. It's just from like talking, keeping in
Mm-hmm.
contact,
Right.
maintaining a network. Yeah.
Yeah, great piece of advice. Yeah, you mentioned the connection I have, just being open to hearing from other people, right? Getting that firsthand experience, things like that. So, we talked a little bit about, how at PET, there's kind of a certain expectation of, becoming a doctor, becoming an engineer, that kind of thing, right? Whereas maybe at certain business schools, it's very finance and consulting based, right? Um, right? Like, yeah, how does Schulich particular, like, do they do a good job of like kind of encouraging entrepreneurship and other things as well? Because I kind of feel like that's like a kind of new age kind of idea to be pushing in business school, right? How does Shula kind of like push that envelope a little bit?
Okay. The way I've come to understand it
Yeah,
after going through Schulich is that Schulich
yeah,
is a funnel. It is a funnel for very bright, ambitious students. to get funneled into big corporations who come and like basically market their companies to catch you or like recruit you. And they're great experiences to have. But in first year, I really wanted to be an accountant. That's like what I set my eyes on, just because I think Big Four like marketed so much towards Schulich. And I was like, accounting or bust. And then I talked to a lot of accountants. I feel bad for anyone who like wants to be an accountant, but this is just my experience. I ended up doing a lot of coffee chats with a bunch of accountants who had graduated from Schulich. I would just cold message them on LinkedIn, try to find things in common, like, hey, like I see this is your experience, and you were at this club, like wanted to know what it was like. And a lot of them like didn't actually like their day-to-day jobs in accounting. So I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to do accounting. Then yeah, I guess I started looking more into getting like doing some research. Yeah, I would do research about like other fields like finance, consulting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the whole kind of learning from other people is important, right? Like trying shoes on for fit, right? Like not everything's gonna fit everyone the same, right? So I think yeah, those coffee chats are super important, things like that. So, what makes Schulich like why are you, kind of drawn to work for them like in an organization like that? Like can you kind of like give us a pitch on, Schulich, their values, things like that makes you feel proud to be, a member of, Schulich startups?
Okay.
Yeah.
Schulich is like a pretty tight-knit community,
Hmm.
I would say. It is a commuter school. Like York University is a commuter school. I did not get super involved in my first and second year, but there are a lot of clubs and opportunities for you to get involved. I guess that's my pitch for Schulich.
Yeah.
Looking back, I'm like very grateful. There, it's not like, I mean, it's competitive, it's cutthroat, but you're never gonna feel like you might be like you have to like keep up with the competition. Well, maybe you do. Maybe you do. I think everyone's experience is different, but I know some universities have higher, what is it called? Like when you don't make it, like they bell curve you out and then you get
Uh,
like dropped out of the
yeah.
program. Schulich does a pretty good job of like, it's like I think the competition is intense between students because and in that respect maybe it's a little similar to pet, but there's no worry about like you're not going to make the cut for the program and you're going to get kicked out. They have a very low like kick out rate, which is something that like was important to me because
Right.
I wanted a bit of stability, I guess.
Hmm.
um yes, so that's
Yeah.
compared to some other like prestigious programs in business.
Yeah. We won't name any names, but
Not
I
naming names,
think
though.
no, we won't name any names on the podcast, but I think we know who we're talking about, right? And yeah, that's kind of that's a big consideration, right? Like doing your research, figuring out, that kind of thing. That's kind of, a quantitative and qualitative factor that can help along the way for sure. So we've talked about everything, right? From, your time in high school, being on DECA, things like that, into your, different experiences, doing consulting, entrepreneurship, um, and then, yeah, giving back to, the school community, things like that, right? So right now in your role, like the way I understand it is you help aspiring entrepreneurs kind of like take their startups to the next stage, right? And one of the hardest things about that is definitely like pitching your idea to other people, right? For something that's so new and maybe even revolutionary, right? Like, do you have any like tips that, you help entrepreneurs kind of, take that next step in scaling their business?
So
Yeah.
update for the podcast, Nathan's lights just went out, but it's okay, we're going to
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah.
um yeah, I think for like pitching, oh my gosh, I used to have the worst social anxiety. Like I was so shy growing up as a kid, which people I guess like is hard to believe because now because I became like super outgoing. Uh for it was all training. I trained myself to like talk because I wanted to like learn how to
Yeah.
talk to people, just like communicate. So and I think like pitching is like communication, being persuasive, negotiation. There are like self-improvement books you can read about it, you can listen to. There's a pretty good one called Never Split the Difference. It's by like a former FBI agent who teaches you like persuasion skills. Really like that book. I listened to it as an audiobook, so I would just like go on walks and listen to like self-improvement and business audiobooks. I got really really into it. I was like sipping the Kool-Aid. And then just like practice. In terms of scaling your business, a lot of it is about your network. Oh my gosh, for like scaling a business I could get really into it because this is like what I do kind of like yeah, but I think like the starting point is like know what problem you're solving, know which customer you're serving. You can have like an amazing idea for a business, but if no one's going to buy it, then like you're not going to survive. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I
I'll
think those
start
are
there.
yeah. Those are, super important for, everything, right? Being able to talk about yourself, being able to talk about the value you provide to other people, making those connections are all super important. And getting that initial funding I heard is like really, really, really difficult to do, right? Because you're attracting a risky investment so early in your life stage from people who don't know what your business is like, right? So I'm glad you talked about that negotiation, because especially at Pet, like entrepreneurship isn't really like valued, right? Like I think generally growing up, we have a very risk averse kind of attitude. So definitely interesting to hear about that. And I'm kind of curious, like, have there been any, of your favorite like projects, without giving away, the secret sauce or anything, but have there been any projects that you've really liked?
In my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, like are there any up and coming kind of projects that you really see value in that you've supported?
Mm. I started a YouTube channel, which was really fun. That was interesting. I really wanted to like get monetized. I did it in 6 months.
Wow.
And it was just like I was thinking about it every day. Like I love when I become like super obsessed with like a problem or like a project. And I would listen to like podcasts about like YouTube growth. So that was fun when I did it. I might bring it back at some point. We'll see.
Hmm.
Right now, the project I'm working on at Schulich Startups is kind of building out our student body of volunteers, like project associates. I'm kind of building out like an internal organization structure. So that is really, really interesting. And
Hmm.
again, I'm thinking about it every day and not sleeping as
Yeah.
much as I should. But it keeps me going. It keeps me going.
Hmm. Yeah, very cool to give back to the community, like a community that you were once part of, trying to figure out what it is that you want to do in life. So that's definitely interesting. And talking about that kind of future aspirations, do you what can we kind of look forward to seeing from you, whether it be professionally, personally, education, traveling, volunteering, that kind of thing?
Oh my gosh, all of the above.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the future holds. Like at one point, I think I used to like plan my future a lot, but my life has just like pivoted so much from my plans, like so many hard pivots. Like maybe like the first one is like just like being in love with like science and chemistry for a decade and then pivoting from that. I think I plan, I have a dream and I'll get to the dream at some point, but I have no idea how I'm going to get there. So to that question, I guess I would say like all of those things. I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. Um, but yeah, I'm optimistic, I would say.
Do you have any, words of wisdom, piece of advice for, high school students, people who are in their undergrad, just trying to figure it out?
I would say like know when to give up or
Yeah.
like know when to pivot. It is like, there's a saying that is like, I forgot how it goes, but like, oh, if you like if there's a fish who like spends its whole life trying to fly, like it's gonna think it's stupid, like for its whole life. But that's not true because like fish are meant to swim. So like know like what is meant for you. And that's not to say that you don't have like free will on choosing that, but it's just like follow your intuition for like what you want and not like what other people like know what it is that like maybe society is like trying to push you into and what you see as your path. Maybe that's like a piece of wisdom
Hmm.
to go back
Yeah.
and tell. I would probably tell that to my old self.
Yeah, no, I think that we talked a lot about, expectations, right? Going from pet to, a business school, things like that, kind of breaking down those walls that exist, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, thank you very much for that insight. And, final question for you. If you could nominate another pet grad to be on the podcast, who would it be?
Yes, I'm gonna nominate. I don't know if he's already been on it, probably not. Brandon Yu.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Has he been on the podcast?
No.
Okay, I'm nominating him.
Okay, very cool. Yes, the star basketball player at Pet. Yeah, very well known for sure. So wrapping up here, thank you so much for your time, dealing with, the lights, things like that. But
I hope it
thanks so
comes
much. I hope so too. Yeah, thank you so much for your insights about, making those connections, making the ask on LinkedIn, right? Pitching yourself, things like that. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone so much for watching, and we'll see everyone next week. Peace out.